Now live from Studio 550, it's McGraw in the Morning on the Big 550 KTRS.
But I need a nuclear reaction to generate the 1.21 gigawatts of electricity.
1.21 gigawatts! 1.21 gigawatts! Great Scott! What the hell is a gigawatt?
You young kids out there, believe it or not, that movie was the hottest movie of 1985. So successful, it produced 2 sequels that they filmed at the exact same time. And 30 years later, we are now living in the future that Back to the Future actually theorized about in the late 80s. Cassine Gaines has written a book. He's a pop culture writer, has written a book about the trilogy, the Back to the Future trilogy. The book is called We Don't Need Roads. Cassine, welcome to Big 550 KTRS here in St. Louis.
Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Is it true that Bob Gale, the writer of Back to the Future, invented Back to the Future in an attic here in St. Louis?
It absolutely is true. It's crazy. Bob Gale's father was a graduate of high school, 1940, and Bob Gale was in St. Louis. His family's from there, and saw his father's yearbook, noticed that his father was high school student council president, and Bob Gale said, God, I would never have hung out with my student council president. I wonder if I would have been friends with my dad if we went to the high school at the same time. And the rest is cinematic history, as they say.
And so he came up with this crazy idea for a script, and then did he knock on Robert Zemeckis' door, or I mean, how did it go from that concept to the movie?
Well, the two were friends, actually. They met in college. They were both film school students at USC in California, and they had been wanting to do a time travel movie for a long time, but couldn't figure out a clever enough concept to actually pursue it. And so when Bob Gale came up with this idea, he went to Bob Zemeckis and said, I think there's a germ of an idea here. And Bob Zemeckis immediately followed up with, yeah, and what if your mom, who always said, you have to watch out for girls because, I was always a prude when I was a kid. What if she was really not? And that sort of, they started playing with these ideas and exploring that.
A brilliant idea that turned into what has to be an iconic movie. In terms of pop culture and in terms of staying power, Back to the Future, I don't think there's been a movie since that has sort of captured the imagination of a film-going audience.
No, Back to the Future is completely relevant. It's stayed relevant for the past 30 years. There's always new merchandise. A couple years ago, Mattel came out with a hoverboard prop replica. The Back to the Future ride was still at Universal Studios until just a couple years ago. There was a new video game that came out a couple years ago. So it's a really strong franchise, and that's not just in the United States. That's all over the world. The Back to the Future films are actually still among the highest-grossing films in Japan, which is crazy considering how long ago they came out.
Cassine, it's fun to look at the movie and say what was in there that actually is happening today, and some of the predictions were right on, even though filmmakers weren't trying to do that.
Yeah, one of the things, certainly, text messaging and emailing is pervasive now, and if you remember in Back to the Future 2, Marty gets these faxes that come out of everywhere. Right. We don't have fax machines really in heavy use, but that sort of instant messaging idea came true. Thumbprint identification, targeted ads. We don't have flying cars and hoverboards.
Not yet.
The movie takes place in October of 2015, so we have a couple months, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
So is it true that Eric Stoltz was the original Marty McFly?
Yes, Eric Stoltz was hired first, and he shot for 6 weeks on the film, and then he was fired. They just weren't getting the laughs from Eric Stoltz. He's a very serious actor and was pursuing it almost more like a drama than a comedy. Bob Zemeckis saw about 45 minutes of footage edited together, realized that the picture would be dead on arrival if they released it that way, and so he went to Steven Spielberg, and the two of them went up to the executives at Universal and lobbied for about $4 million in permission to recast the film and reshoot about 6 weeks of material.
So they were pretty far along with Eric Stoltz.
Yeah, they were, and it's funny because at that point in Bob Zemeckis' career, that was a highly unusual request. It's a highly unusual request for anyone, but he had such conviction in this idea that he wanted to make sure it was done the right way, and that was obviously the right decision.
At the time, Robert Zemeckis now's name is synonymous with Contact and Forrest Gump. In 1985, how big was he?
He Back to the Future was his fourth film. His first two films, I Want to Hold Your Hand and Used Cars, were very well received by the very few people who saw them. They weren't very big hits at all.
Right.
And then he did Romancing the Stone, which was a pretty large success and enabled him to do Back to the Future. But he was not the Robert Zemeckis that we know today. He wasn't the Academy Award winner. He hadn't done Forrest Gump and Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Castaway. He was still fighting hard for a hit.
Okay, so it was invented in a U City attic by Bob Gale, and you also don't have Back to the Future unless you have Chuck Berry.
Right. Yeah, and that Johnny B. Good number is so important to the film. And the funny thing that I didn't know until I started working on the book was they almost didn't get permission to use that song. Chuck Berry, at the last minute, sort of wanted some more money, and they gave him a whole lot of money to to be able to use that number in the movie. But it came really down to the wire. They were ready to film, and they didn't know whether or not he was going to give his permission at the end of the day.
What about his cousin Marvin Berry? Did he get any money out of the deal?
Yeah, and not only did he get some money, but he got a gold record. He didn't know that when for Earth Angel, which is also in the movie that character sings, he sang it in a recording studio, and he believed that they were going to dub his voice, but he did a good enough job where they kept him, and now he has a gold record under his belt, along with Huey Lewis in the News. So that's a cool honor to have.
How about that? Cassine Gaines, the book is called We Don't Need Roads. We could talk about it so much more, but that's why we want to buy the book. Bookstores everywhere, Amazon.com. Anywhere else we can get the book?
Anywhere, everywhere. My website is CassineGaines.com, and you can find links there to pick it up.
You got it. Cassine Gaines, We Don't Need Roads, the 30th anniversary of what is considered one of the greatest movies of all time, Back to the Future. Cassine, thanks for checking in.
Thank you for having me.
You got it. Quick check of traffic and weather on his hoverboard. Here's Tim Weiland in the St. Louis Closet Company Traffic Center.